We often think venial sin doesn't matter, and we forget that it is still very harmful, second only to mortal sin. The Bible shows many examples of how seriously God views venial sin. Even in this life, He has punished it. For example, Moses was not allowed to enter the Promised Land just because he doubted God's mercy for a moment. A venial sin is a less serious sin against God's law. It doesn't take away sanctifying grace from the soul, and it can be forgiven even without going to confession. A sin becomes venial in two main ways. When we do something wrong that's not very serious, we commit a venial sin. For example, complaining when your mom asks you to open a window is a venial sin, not a serious one. A serious act can still be venial if the person thinks it's only a small wrong, or if they act quickly without thinking, or without fully agreeing to it. For example, stealing a ring is serious, but if someone truly thinks it's cheap costume jewelry, their guilt is much less. Eating meat on a day of abstinence while thinking it's only a small sin, or insulting someone in sudden anger without thinking, would also be venial sins because there wasn't full knowledge or full consent. Examples of venial sin include impatience, small complaints, or harmless lies. The word venial comes from a Latin word meaning easily forgiven. Even very good people fall into venial sin often, and God allows this so we stay humble. A person becomes much holier as soon as he avoids all deliberate venial sins, sins done knowingly and on purpose. If a person is in the state of grace, venial sins can be forgiven in many ways besides confession, as long as the person is truly sorry and wants to avoid the sins in the future. Venial sins are forgiven through Holy Communion, acts of contrition, prayer, and good works. We must also understand the difference between venial sins and imperfections. Imperfections come from weakness or lack of attention, not from bad intentions. For example, getting distracted in prayer, telling white lies while telling a story, or having small rude habits are imperfections. We should still try to avoid them, because they annoy others and slowly form bad habits. Venial sin harms us by making us less eager to serve God, making us weaker against temptation, and causing punishments from God either in this life or in purgatory. Even though venial sin is not as serious as mortal sin, it is still a real moral evil. It's like putting a drop of ink in a glass of clear water. The water is no longer clear, even if the ink is small. If we commit venial sins often, our will becomes weaker. Then it becomes easier for us to fall into mortal sin. The Bible warns that ignoring small faults leads to bigger ones. Just as a tiny spark can start a huge fire, venial sin can slowly lead to more serious sins by making us spiritually lazy. Venial sin makes us lose many of the special helps from God, called actual graces, that we need to resist temptation. A dusty mirror cannot reflect clearly. Likewise, a soul clouded by venial sin cannot reflect God's grace as it should. God doesn't give as many graces to a soul that is careless with sin. If we die with venial sins still on our soul, or without making up for them, we must be purified in purgatory before entering heaven. Wanting strongly not to offend God, even in small ways, is the best sign of real love for Him. The Bible shows many examples of God punishing even venial sins. Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt for her curiosity. Jesus said we will give an account even for careless words. We avoid sin by praying, receiving the sacraments, remembering God is always with us, remembering our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, keeping busy with good activities, resisting temptations quickly, and avoiding situations where we know we might sin. Prayer and the sacraments protect us from sin like a strong fortress protects people inside it. When the apostles were afraid on the stormy lake, they prayed. In the same way, we should build a wall of prayer around us. When we stay close to the sacraments, we grow strong and resist sin more easily, just as a healthy body fights off sickness better. Even good people sin because they forget that God is always present. We should remember that God sees us every moment. If we truly remembered this, we wouldn't want to offend Him. If we wouldn't use bad language or steal in front of an important person, how much more should we behave well before God, who is always with us? When we are in the state of grace, our bodies become temples of the Holy Spirit. God lives in us just as Jesus is present in the tabernacle. Remembering this helps us avoid sin. One of the best ways to avoid sin is to keep ourselves busy with good work or good activities. People who sit around doing nothing often fall into bad habits. A thief avoids a house where people are awake and active. In the same way, staying busy with good things keeps us from gossiping or getting into trouble.